Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, September 2nd, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the 2022 Senate elections. As of today, this prediction is going to be a culmination of many things that we've seen over the past few weeks alone that have really changed the trajectory of the midterm elections. For the first time in a very long time, I am saying I think the Democratic Party has a realistic shot at maintaining both chambers of Congress, the House of Representatives and the United States Senate. Now, I still think the Republican Party pulls ahead in the House of Representatives, but if you've been watching any of my more recent predictions over the past couple of months, you will know that I'm a lot more bullish on the GOP's chances at victory this November in the Senate elections, and that holds true through today. To give you a bit of context as to where we are following the last prediction, which was done on August 7th, we are in now a national environment where the Democratic Party won special elections in both New York and the state of Alaska, flipping a red seat to blue in a year that is expected to be so much better for the GOP than what has been released and has been seen over the past couple of weeks. I will say that I go into these midterms with a lot of apprehension for polling data and for general gauges of accuracy for either political party. Do Democrats pull ahead? Do Republicans pull ahead? Generally speaking, these are things that are very hard to predict, and they are things that I have been wrong about in the past, but also I have been right about as well. So looking at my Senate map, I will say that I want you to take it with a grain of salt, largely because these predictions are just a snapshot in time as to where we see it today, and this might not be the actual result in November. This is just an indicator as to where the American public is as of right now, based off of my own analysis. Now, we're going to start off with this prediction by characterizing the states that we normally do as safe and solid for either political party. Believe it or not, the majority of the states are not competitive this election cycle, and we'll get into the ones that are the most important and the most heavy in terms of determining balance of power for this November election. So starting on the West Coast, the Democratic Party easily landslides those elections. Now, the state of Alaska, I'm going to characterize as safe Republican. Some people might be thinking, do Democrats have a shot at the Senate race here? Absolutely not. The Republican here, Lisa Murkowski, is practically, in many Republicans' eyes, a Democrat altogether, which has actually boosted her numbers amongst the left-wing side of the Democratic Party within the state of Alaska. We've seen in consistent polls the Democrats getting about 10 to 20% of the vote instead of the traditional 40 to 45%, depending on the wave year. But realistically speaking, the state of Alaska will be in Republican hands because the top two contenders heading into November are two Republicans. So for right now, Alaska is going to be safe red. This is not a case of a Sarah Palin type of House special election where there's a chance the Democrats do win. The Senate race is entirely out of question. The states of Idaho and Utah are very solid for the Republican Party. Utah you might have heard about because of the independent candidate there, Evan McMullin, in which the Democratic Party actually refused to run a candidate to actually boost Evan McMullin, the independent's chances at winning that seat. Now, both of them would likely end up either caucusing or being a Republican, so I will say that I'm not expecting much in terms of a transition or a balance of power difference within the state of Utah, but for right now, the state of Utah, I would say, is a safe Republican state. North and South Dakota also really jump into this mix as very solid states for the GOP. Kansas as well. Oklahoma actually has a special election as well. If you're wondering what that circle is, it means there's also an additional special election coinciding to fill the remainder of a senator's term there. That race goes safe to the GOP. In the state of Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, safe Republican states. Missouri, for a brief period of time, there was a possibility that it would become more competitive. That has completely been thrown out the window now that the Republicans have chosen a much better candidate, should I say, than Eric Greitens within this state. Missouri, safe red. Kentucky, Indiana, South Carolina, Alabama, safe Republican states. Republicans have nothing to worry about in those red states. Now, for the Democrats, they have their own set of safe states as well. We've already characterized the West Coast, but we also have the state of Illinois as well. That's Tammy Duckworth's seat. She was actually mentioned as a potential presidential contender in 2024 and a potential vice presidential contender for President Biden back in 2020. The state of Maryland joins the ranks as a safe Democratic state. New York as well. Vermont as well, which has a retiring Democratic incumbent, but that doesn't really impact the electability of the Democrats in that race, safe on the Democratic side. And the state of Kentucky, also a safe Democratic state. So in these states, we have 45, in the United States altogether, we have 45 safe Democratic seats, 5 away from a needed amount to get a majority. Republicans have 44, 7 away from a needed amount to get to a majority. But it isn't as simple as swing states and safe states. There are also likely lean tilt states where we have a general idea and a general expectation for which political party is going to pull ahead this November. And these likely states are practically safe states, at least in the way that we characterize them, though we have seen likely states narrow down to be more competitive and in some cases actually flip to the opposition party. None of these safe states, I would say, in the upcoming elections are expected to flip by anyone. All of them are characterized as safe and solid by practically every single reputable pollster, ranking, pundit, whatever it might be. These states, the ones that we have characterized thus far, are safe for their respective parties. Really, no chance at the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, winning safe red or safe blue states. But for the likely characterizations, I wouldn't exactly count them out just yet, and we'll characterize which states are likely for either political party. To begin, we'll start off with the likely Republican states because they are coming from behind. We have the states of Iowa and Florida. These are two states that we routinely characterize as likely and have in practically every single election, except the state of Iowa, interestingly enough, is narrowing down to likely from what was safe. And I'll give you my justification for that. The state of Iowa is a state in which the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have been fighting for a long period of time. But over the past 6 years, the Republican Party has ultimately pulled ahead. In 2018, they won the governorship. In 2016, they won the presidential election there. 2020, they won the Senate election and the governorship. And then in 2022, the long-term incumbent here, who has been here for literally decades, over 40 years in the U.S. Senate, is returning to run for re-election. Now, that actually poses as a problem for the GOP rather than something that would benefit them. Traditionally, I would say the state of Iowa is a safe red state because Chuck Grassley was running on the ballot, and I did for practically every single prediction following Chuck Grassley's announcement that he was running for re-election. But that isn't the full story. What we've seen from a new pollster from the state of Iowa, the most accurate pollster from both 2016 and 2020, was that the state of Iowa actually is down to an 8-point race. It's not competitive necessarily for the Democratic Party, but it's definitely a lot better than being down about 15 points statewide, or even more than that. They lost the last election in the state of Iowa by 25 points with Senator Chuck Grassley. So to see it narrowed down to 8 points, again, by the most accurate pollster from both 2016 and 2020, it has led me to believe that the state of Iowa will be under 15 points. It's not to say the Democrats are going to come close to victory. It's not to say the Democratic Party has made major strides, or this is an indicator of Roe versus Wade or anything like that. I think it solely has to do with the electability of the Democrat there nudging up narrowly from where President Biden was, or potentially slightly worse than President Biden, but not being blown out by 25, and also rather the unelectability of the Republican here. Chuck Grassley is, for some reason, someone who has been able to win in Iowa politics, but as of more recently, people do not want him to run for re-election, and that is displayed very evidently in practically every poll across the state. The state of Florida, on the other hand, Marco Rubio is just on track for re-election. That's not really been any type of major development. You take a look at my prediction from the beginning of the entirety of the 2022 election season, quite literally December 2020, when I made my first prediction, Florida was a likely red state. Today it stays as a likely red state. So I'd say that's where I'm comfortable characterizing it as such. The Democrats, on the other hand, have their own likely states as well. And those are the states of New Hampshire and Colorado. Now, Colorado might not come as a surprise to you, and honestly, it shouldn't. The state of Colorado has been likely for the Democratic Party for a while now, by my estimation. But the one that is now joining the likely Democratic ranks for the first time, I think, in the entirety of this entire time, we have seen the state of New Hampshire move in a leftward direction that has been beneficial, I should say, for the Democratic Party. Looking at the Republicans in the rankings and looking at the Republicans who are potentially considering running for office here, none of them strike me as these overwhelmingly electable Republicans. The only time I had New Hampshire in the Republican column was when we were coming off the high of Glenn Youngkin winning in the state of Virginia, and it looked as if everything was doomed for the Democratic Party. They just flipped, Republicans being they, just flipped a Biden plus 10 state. It was double digits. To see a Democrat lose in the state of Virginia, especially one that had won in a previous red wave year, had set us up to believe that 2022 was going to be worse for Democrats than 2014, a year in which the Democratic Party, the Republican Party gained 9 seats from the Democrats nationwide. So to see the state of New Hampshire in that point, where Chris Sununu, the governor, could potentially be running, it looked a lot better for the GOP. But then, quite literally, days after I made this prediction, Chris Sununu said that he was not going to be running. And immediately, I moved it down to tilt Republican. And then the Republicans who were deciding to run began to gain publicity and gain in the polls, because at that point, the most popular contender, Chris Sununu, had decided to withdraw himself from the race and thus did not decide to run. And since then, it's been a lean Democratic state. Now, from the beginning, New Hampshire had been in the lean Democratic column. I never had it in the likely Democratic column, but as of recently, if this race does actually narrow down to less than 5 points, honestly, I would be quite surprised. It wouldn't be shocking by any means, but what I am saying is that I am very confident that Maggie Hassan wins in the state of New Hampshire this November. Things can change, but what we have seen from the special elections in New York, Minnesota, Nebraska, Kansas, Alaska, every single election post-Dobbs decision has proven the Democratic Party better than where they were in 2020. significantly. And honestly, I think that's enough to move that state into the likely Democratic column. So we're wasting time talking about New Hampshire. Let's move on into the more important states, the ones that are going to be even more competitive than Colorado, Iowa, Florida, and New Hampshire. And these are the states that are going to be characterized by a lean characterization, or even narrower than that, tilt. I don't leave states to the toss-up column. So right now we're at 47 for the Democrats, 46 for the Republicans. Republicans are still behind, so let's go ahead and characterize their lean states. And they come in a set of two yet again, the state of Ohio and the state of North Carolina. Now, I will say that as of right now, these two states have really shocked me to the extent that the Republican Party is not performing as well as they otherwise should be. These are two states that I've had in the likely Republican column for quite some time now. North Carolina, not always, but the point is that I've never once had the Democrats ahead in these states. And as of recently, despite the Democrats gaining in the generic ballot, President Biden's approval rating starting to uptick, my prediction has been solely based and rooted in the fact that these states are out of reach for the Democrats. But what we have seen in terms of numbers from both Ohio and North Carolina, Republican internals, nonpartisan pollsters, Democratic internals, that Democrats are surprisingly doing a lot better in these states than anyone could have expected. And while it might be just an egregious polling error, it also is the fact that fundraising numbers look a lot better for Democrats here than they do in other states. And specifically in the state of Ohio, Republicans have nominated a very bad candidate, contrary to what could have been. Rob Portman as an incumbent who probably would have won this election by over 20 points. So to see these races now as lean Republican states means our country is in for a different type of midterms than what I even expected 3 weeks ago. The Democratic Party was on the up and up on August 7th, but not to the extent that they are today. On August 7th, Democrats had just reclaimed the lead on the generic ballot, but I said it myself then that I didn't expect it to maintain itself even as long as it does right now. In addition to that, President Biden's approval rating has certainly upticked since August 7th. On August 7th, President Biden was down by about 16 points nationwide. Today, he's only down by about 10. And amongst likely or registered voters, that narrows up to being about 9 points. And the Senate forecast looks a hell of a lot better for the Democratic Party than it did just 3 weeks ago. So a lot of that has been really driving my expectation that Democrats are to improve their chances and to narrow down the state of Ohio. I will say that it looks like there's going to be a lot of money funneled into Ohio, funneled into North Carolina over the final few weeks of the campaign, or maybe over the next 2 months. And altogether, I think that does revert our states back to being likely red states. But as of right now, if the election was held today, I honestly think J.D. Vance would win by 4, and that Sherry Beasley and Ted Budd would be in about a 3 to 4 point race as well. Moving on to our lean Democratic states, we have two as well. It's very interesting. They are coming together in pairs of 2. We have the states of Pennsylvania and Arizona. Now, this actually comes as not directly in response to the change by Larry Sabato's crystal ball, which moved both of these two states into the lean Democratic column. I've practically had them as lean Democratic states for quite some time now. But what I will say is that these states have definitely proven me that the Democratic Party does have an ability to move forward and does have an ability to really negate any type of red wave advantage the GOP might have in these states. The Democratic Party is doing very, very well in Pennsylvania and Arizona, but honestly, it more so has to do with the Republican Party's inability to field strong and qualified candidates for these races. You have a TV personality in the state of Pennsylvania, and I know someone's going to say we said the same thing about Trump, but here's the thing. Dr. Oz cannot campaign to even a tenth in terms of energy, enthusiasm, ability to sway voters to the way that Donald Trump did. And neither can Blake Masters. Blake Masters is a good orator. I will give him that. But his policy standpoints that he required himself to take in order to win the primary made him unelectable for the general election. As much as he would like to change the narrative, pivot towards the center, what he has said and put out has already labeled him and deemed him as an unelectable Republican. Carrie Lake, who holds very similar values, has somehow positioned herself better for the governorship than Blake Masters has in this election because, quite frankly, she is a more electable Republican. She says things more eloquently. She says things more moderate toned. Yes, she is extreme, but no one really perceives her to the same level of extremism as Blake Masters, and that's the problem for him, which is why he's behind in these two states. The Democrats are ahead in these two states as well. So Pennsylvania, Arizona, lean Democratic states, I think they share a characterization. If one goes down, so does the other. But right now, the Democratic Party is certainly up in these two states. The final characterization that we will use is a tilt characterization, where we expect the race to be narrowed down and decided by a margin of less than 1%, which means truly it could go in either direction. I would probably bet on these 49 to 48 states in favor of the GOP, in favor of the Democrats. But for these remaining 3, they truly are toss-ups, but I want to give you a general idea of where I think they are going to go, and I think that's the fairest way to approach these states. The first state we are going to characterize is the state of Georgia, a state that I previously had as lean Democrat, that following new data from the state, I have as a tilt Democratic state. Looking at the polls from Emerson, Trafalgar, etc., a lot of them were off in 2020 and 2021, so I will say that I've definitely taken that into consideration when valuing these polls, looking at their 2018 numbers, looking at their 2016 numbers, and also some other pollsters that have thrown themselves into the mix. Altogether, I will say the Democratic Party certainly seems to have not been improving based off their numbers in the state of Georgia, despite improving practically everywhere else across the nation. But I still think the Democrats do narrowly pull ahead. But again, it is an extremely narrow process, extremely narrow margin, whereas maybe 3 weeks ago, I would have said the Democrats could go from anywhere from 2 to 3 points. Now you're talking less than a point. Definitely has narrowed up. For the next state we are going to characterize is the state of Wisconsin. This used to be, surprisingly enough, a likely red state following the Glenn Youngkin victory in the state of Virginia. From then onward, we realized that Ron Johnson probably wasn't going to win by a likely margin if he wasn't able to do it in 2016. But what I will say is that Mandela Barnes has certainly shocked me in terms of his ability to make this race electable. Everybody wrote him off, including myself. We called him a sacrificial lamb. We said that this race was not winnable. And the reason why we said that was because Ron Johnson has proven to us many, many times that he has been able to overcome what the polling data has said, has been able to overcome what X, Y, and Z has said. But here's the thing. The most accurate Rust Belt pollster, a Republican internal from Trafalgar, showed Mandela Barnes leading by a margin of about 4 points statewide. In addition to that, you have many polls, Republican, Democratic internals, and nonpartisan pollsters all telling us that this race is competitive. In addition to that, the Republicans are recognizing it. They're spending money on this race. They're not giving it up to just say, this is going to go Republican no matter what we do, like they might be able to in some other states, because Wisconsin is absolutely narrowing up, and it's becoming more and more obvious as the days go on. We are just now catching on to it, but the Democrats have a realistic shot at victory there. It truly could go either way, but Republicans right now, I think, are the narrow favorites. And in the final state we are going to characterize, which is going to determine balance of power. Actually, it doesn't. Democrats are already at 50 states. This state actually adds to the Democratic Party's 50 number right now, which is the state of Nevada. I have been very, very apprehensive about making the state of Nevada a likely red state. I think that, a blue state following what we have seen. The Republicans have been lucky enough to maintain their advantage from about July onwards until now, up until we've seen more data from the state, in addition to generally just a better expectation and understanding of the state of Nevada. As of right now, the state of Nevada is a tilt Democratic state by my own metrics, by what I have seen thus far. It puts the Democrats at 51, puts the Republicans at 49, and it is a very good showing for the Democratic Party. The Democrats officially, through this map, have gained a Senate seat in a year that was supposed to be so abysmal, so cataclysmic for their Senate and House majorities, but yet somehow the Democratic Party pulled ahead. That somehow is the United States Supreme Court, and don't let anyone tell you that that isn't the reason why. Democrats have done a very good job at using it as a rallying call, and the American public has expressed very clearly in every special election post-Dobbs that they care about the issue of abortion, and that will be a driving factor for November. For 49 years, voters did not have to worry about Roe v. Wade simply because the Supreme Court tried and tested it multiple times. Yes, voters did take into consideration pro-life versus pro-choice, but it was never their number 1, number 2, number 3, practically speaking, never their top 10 issues. But more recently, especially now, it has either become number 1, number 2, or number 3. And knowing that 62% of the nation disagreed with the Dobbs decision, 58% of the nation self-identifies as pro-choice, Republicans have made the wrong move in that decision. And they are going to see the repercussions for it these November midterm elections that honestly should have gone so much better than a 51 to 49 map with Democrats gaining seats relative to what they have right now. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.